On the Business Spotlight today, I'm delighted to have Jason Schroede from the Scottish Men's Sheds Association. Thank you for joining me on the Business Spotlight, Jason.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me here today. It's great.
So, I've heard of the Scottish Men's Shed Association. There's one just along the road here in my village, but a lot of people maybe aren't aware of what you do. Tell us about the men's sheds.
Okay, well, why do we even need such thing as a men's shed in the 21st century? So it takes me back about 13 years when I asked the question, well, where are the men, or particularly older men at that stage, which is what I'm requiring as you can hear, I'm not Scottish, South African, living in Scotland and looking for older men to mentor me being a single dad. And that's actually how this whole thing got going. I then went down the rabbit hole finding out, well, what is going on with men when they're not employed?
Mm-hmm.
And actually that rabbit hole was a very dark one. Not for all men, but for a lot of us. And so when I heard about the Men's Shed Association, which started in Australia back in the late 1990s, and I then investigated that, I thought, I wonder if this could work in Scotland. And the difference in Scotland really is it's for men over the age of 18 who have time on their hands. So time on your hands for whatever reason, whether you're an offshore oil rig worker and you're home for 3 weeks, or you're retired, or, one of the guys fell off a roof and broke his back in 3 places. What's he going to do with his time, his recovery? So if you've got time on your hands, you're in Scotland, you probably want to go along to a men's shed, which is a place where men are socially gathering in a healthy way. So there's no alcohol, plenty of tea, coffee and cakes and biscuits and things like that, with a purpose. So what we find with men is that we can kind of sit around for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then our bodies want to move. Our testosterone levels go up and we want to get going and doing something. So men's sheds are places which may be a little bit like the garden shed, but way, way bigger. Most of them have workshops in them, so that draws a certain type of guy. But you might be a man who isn't interested in workshop facilities, woodworking, metalworking, whatever. You want to go down and have a cup of tea and a chat, meet some new friends. Or you might be interested in growing plants, polytunnels, or computers, or shooting a game of pool, playing cards, model railway making. Oh, you name it. The beautiful thing about sheds is that every shed is absolutely different, and the shed is made up of the men in the shed and their interests. So as new men come into the shed and old ones go, the interests change in the sheds, and so there's always something different going on. But the main point of the men's shed is to get men out of the house. In the shed world, we call it the underfoot syndrome, where men are pretty rubbish at socializing, if there's no alcohol involved, or risky business. Us guys tend to go down the risky business avenue. And so we created this new place in the 21st century where men can get together in camaraderie and kindness. They're all volunteers. The association doesn't run the sheds, and that's on purpose. So we find that if the sheds are independent of us, they're run by the men for the men, that the men actually get engaged voluntarily. And, we've got over 202 sheds in Scotland now, right across all 32 localities or local authorities. And we're engaging over 10,000 men. And so the National Association, which I head up and started, is here to really get the sheds started, and the development pathway, which helps them start and go right the way up until opening. And then also now we've developed sustainable pathways as well. So, discounts and things like that through our membership schemes. So the sheds can run profitably and not costing them a fortune.
So it's initially created to help with mental health issues in men? In older men?
No, not at all.
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily at all. It is a health provision. Yeah, we call it health by stealth. With us blokes, if you say this is because of this, we kind of stigmatize ourselves. And then we go, oh, I'm not going to label myself with that, so I don't end up going. So you won't find Get Better posters in a shed. You won't find suicide prevention posters in a shed. Basically, we found that if men feel safe in a place, they will open up at vulnerability. This is the unique thing about men sheds compared to community groups, is that the men feel safe in the shed. And when they do, they open up into vulnerable conversations, which then involves their health. But basically, it's about helping men keep socializing. We know from post-COVID that isolation and loneliness is the biggest killer of human beings, more so than cancer. And the NHS say it's equivalent to someone smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So huge health benefits. So really, it's a prevention more than anything.
And then,
and it's also about intergenerational men, intergenerationally being able to come together, and youngsters getting mentoring from older men and sharing their wisdom like we used to have back in the day in the village hundreds of years ago, because it's very difficult to find these older men with the wisdom of life anymore.
fantastic. And then I also see them giving back to the community, like the workshop part there, making things and helping others, I guess. Does that happen around them all?
Yeah, well, the sheds are run, our development pathway is a charity, so that we get the men to set up, if they want to, as a separate charity. And the beautiful thing about the engagement is that they're forced to engage with their local communities, because without that community support, the things that they make or the things that they do for their community, which will bring in donations, they can't run the sheds. So they need money, and as we know with grant funding, that is getting narrower and narrower, tighter and tighter. So that's one of the reasons for the association, is that we have partnerships, through electricity, insurance, things like that, which gives them discounts, so their running costs are lower. And not every man shed is workshop driven, although the workshop side of it is the biggest income earner for the guys. So it does depend on the type of membership.
So that brings us on nicely to the questions around the challenges that you're facing then in growing the organization, and the challenges that each shed then faces. What's the biggest challenge at the moment?
Well, there's two different answers to that question, Brenda, I would say. From a national perspective, from the Scottish Men Shed Association, we're a charity as well. We don't generate funds really about anything. We're a support charity. So we are almost 100% dependent upon grants. And the Scottish government decided last year that they were no longer funding us. And that was a major blow to us. It came out of the blue. We've had short life working groups with them. We've had very good meetings with the ministers. Our patron is the ex-Health Medical Chief Officer of Scotland, Sir Harry Burns. It's a no-brainer that this is saving the NHS and saving our population billions. And why the government take a U-turn at this point post-COVID, we have no idea. And they have given us no reasons at all. And so this is why we started the 38-degree campaign, and we got a letter written by 40 ministers of all parties directly to the First Minister and the Deputy Minister saying, you need to make a U-turn on this. This is a fatally bad mistake. So breaking news is basically we got a little bit of money from them where they said you were going to get zero. That's going to keep us alive, not in our development plans, but basically keep the door open for the next 8 months, which will take us up to the next financial year. And we've got a whole reshuffle of ministers now. The First Minister has resigned, and the Deputy Minister and various others have shuffled around. So we've got 8 months to speak now to new ministers, build new relationships, and try to get them going in the right direction. The First Minister at the moment, Hamza Yousaf, he loves the Govern Men Shed. He's a younger man. He understands what it's about. That's a very positive, spin for us. So, watch this space. If we get into the sheds themselves, post-COVID, the men are tired. They're coming to us for a lot of support. The trustees are tired. We do now mediating in the sheds because, like with community groups, the members and the board can get a little bit frosty towards one another. Sometimes they don't understand. They think they're in the the pyramid model of the chairman is equivalent to the managing director of the firm, and so we go down our structure. Well, men's sheds are not like that at all. It's a completely new community development model, which is in a circle, but like the knights of old of Camelot and King Arthur. Let's just say the chairman is the king, but he's not. He sits around the table with one man, one vote, and everybody is equal. And the shed is made up for the men by the men, and that's very significant. And therefore, everybody has a say in what happens in their shed. And sometimes, the guys forget that because they come from the business model, which is the pyramid model. And so we go in and mediate to keep the peace between the members and the board and get them to remember that these are all men with big hearts who are volunteering their time to have the shed open. And if they're not happy with it, then they just need to communicate. And so we keep the dialogue going and the peace in the sheds. And I can say that post-COVID, that's become pretty much a weekly thing at the moment. So that does show the fatigue that is in the movement. We've also got a lot of new sheds that are coming to us. And that's one of our problems, is that we're over capacity now and we can't support the development needs of the sheds because we don't have enough staff because we never got the funding. So that's a challenge for the movement. It's a challenge for us. But the good takeaway about that is that we can see there's a great need in our community for it.
Mm-hmm.
Engaging 10,000 men 6 years ago, none of those men were really engaged in anything. That is just phenomenal. And I can tell you another great statistic, which is men's sheds are now in 16 countries. So it's not just Scotland, it's wherever we've got this capitalistic education system that in the West that we've exported around the world. We're seeing the suffering, particularly with men who are not employed, are really find it difficult to socialize in a healthy way. And there has been no mechanism. It's been the betting shop and the pub. And we know that that is not healthy really for anybody. And so we've brought a new place to our society and our world. And we've just been helping Canada and America get going with all our Scottish development stuff. They really like what I've done here because it's a grassroots movement. And so we've given them all our information, all our development pathways. So, yeah, it's just quite amazing, really, to think, 13 years ago, this was a dream. And here we are now actually influencing, probably hundreds of thousands, millions of people across the world. So,
you said post-COVID that you're going in, the men are tired and they're having to be mediation. Have you seen a bigger requirement for men's sheds for what you're doing there post the pandemic?
Yes, I think if there's anything positive to take away from the pandemic is that when we say isolation and loneliness, everybody understands now what we're talking about. Pre-COVID, what does that actually mean? Men are hardwired for it, where women aren't. Our neural pathways, our neural makeup is very different between the two genders. And this conversation, even though politicians and people do not want to accept that, sadly, it is now becoming more and more obvious. And if we start looking at twin health policies, which I hope the government will look at and take our lead, that they will realize that there's very little research that has been done on men's health in the world. We were asked at a meeting last week to attend through the Equalities and the Human Rights Commission about a segment of the 2010 legislation, which was sex, basically meaning the genders. And this was about boys and men. So they were looking to do research for a new policy coming out at the end of the year, which they do every 3 to 5 years to look at the legislation as it's still fit for purpose. And I was the only person there attending that national conference for men. And about 15 minutes later, somebody else came on board from Abused Men in Scotland. So across the whole sector of the country, there were only 2 organizations who showed up to have that conversation about men's health and about equality and legislation and human rights. And that just absolutely tells me we are probably one of the most important developing sectors in the world today. And still, people are not willing to accept it or support us. And that, unfortunately, is sad for everybody. Very sad.
So is marketing a challenge? Marketing to, well, getting your message out rather than marketing to the policymakers and the funders, and also to the communities, and finding the men that would benefit from these organizations.
Finding the men, that's why, we've created a grassroots movement and why we've been so successful. My background is publishing and marketing. So I'm probably obviously pretty good at it. Engaging 10,000 blokes who don't want to do anything unless it's risky. If I can say to myself, I think I've done an all right job in the marketing side of it.
Well, the lobby,
the biggest problem,
the challenge.
Yeah, I just started this in 2009. So, and it did take 4 years to get the first shed open, but within the last 13 odd years, and particularly the last 7 since the National Charities got on going, I mean, it's wildfire.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, as you said there, it's the policymakers. So if we have to look at the history really of why men are in the predicament they're in. We've been bred to say the kind of man we like is strong and silent. Are you the strong and silent type? Well, let's just break that down. Strong and silent means shut up. It means don't talk about your emotional issues, mister, or you're weak.
Yeah.
So we've had hundreds of years of that bred into us. And so all of a sudden in the 21st century, all of a sudden we're saying, oh, no, we want men to talk about the issues. We want them to be vulnerable. Well, does that mean then we're not strong? So there's a whole new development model of conversation that has to happen. And then we have things like, those things that are at least 3-4 generations, if not more, they're still alive, or, grow a pair, man up, don't be a girl, stop crying, you're a sissy. All that kind of stuff. I heard that. My grandfather's heard that. My son hasn't heard that. He's 25 now, 26. And I was a youth worker for 10 years. And so we're bringing up kids to be different, but we learn by example. So the parents of those kids are still kind of manifesting that unless they're onto a new way of parenting. So we've probably got another 40 years of getting rid of that model. And unless we can get men together and not having them sitting at home alone, which is what we do, and actually feel safe enough to have these conversations and challenge the past, saying we don't want to be like this anymore, and we don't want these places, our kids, to be like that anymore. It's not serving our boys, and it's certainly not serving the girls and their wives. We're hearing that already from wives in their 20s and 30s. And the men are still, unfortunately committing suicide. We've got the highest rate of suicide in Europe. And that statistic is aged between 28 and 35, 40. Now, those are our fathers. And we've got to look at that hard statistic. And as far as I'm concerned, it's because, and I was there myself actually in 2009, where I contemplated taking my own life because of the financial crash. And it's when you don't have hope anymore and you've lost your purpose. And then as single-minded men, which are very single-focused in our neural pathways, if we don't find other solutions, we drop into depression very quickly. And the only solution we can find is taking our own lives, sadly. Now, we know that through the men's shed movement, men going to the sheds either don't ever get there because they get camaraderie and friendships formed. They're not alone. And why is it the wife is the last to hear about this? It's because we're also hardwired to be the hero.
Yeah.
And we're the warrior. You know, I'm an ex-Marine. I'm a tough guy back in the day. And then what am I meant to do with these emotions? I suffered with PTSD. What are we meant to do with them? We're meant to be tough. So we're not going to talk about them. That says we're weak. So basically, it's a whole remodeling of our society of saying, what does a 21st century man look like? And what do we want our kids, you know, to grow up to be? And that means men are going to have to do work on themselves. And that's inner work. And where do you go to get inner work? Now, there are various associations or charities out there that offer a rites of passage into manhood. You know, there's something in our culture we don't do, unfortunately, anymore. Many other cultures still have rites of passage. So what says I'm a boy to a man? What in our society says you were a boy, but now you're a man, and this is our expectation of you? We don't have it. And therefore, you know, I see a lot of older men running around with boy psychology in their heads. And so we have been led down a disservice of the beauty of what it is to be a man, a wise man. And that doesn't matter on your age. You know, I've met some incredibly wise 20-year-olds and some very, very silly 70-year-olds. And yeah, you've obviously met them too. And that's just incredibly sad. And so to me, if we can bring a new community model of engagement where men are allowed to feel and change and want to, and my understanding of that, it basically means we're going to leave the world in a better place than we inherited and we were born into. And that's what drives me every day. That's what I want to leave for my kids, you know, all kids.
I think you've described it so well. You know, you're obviously very passionate about the organization and about the difference that you can make to a really important area of our society. What do you think the next 5 years will hold for the Scottish Men's Sheds Association? What are your goals for 5 years' time?
5 years, you know, at the moment, I'm a social entrepreneur and visionary. That's why I'm here on the planet. And 5 years from now, I don't know. You know, I'm doing short term at the moment, year to year. The political twists that are going on in Scotland at the moment are just phenomenal. So a 5-year plan, which would have been the given 2 years ago, I had a 5 to 10 to 15-year plan. They've been thrown out the window. You know, it's a bit like you've got to be flexible. And if you ain't flexible and you can't move, you ain't going to survive. That's just simple. That's any business plan, as I'm sure you know. I'm doing 365 days planning at the moment. 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. The Scottish government's come out and said, we want to give you 3-year funding. It's like, and in that application, which we're filling in now for the Loneliness and Isolation Fund, they have a really, in that funding application, they say, but the funding might not be there in year 2 because this is politics. So even though they're saying it could be a 3-year plan, it absolutely might not be. I'm a businessman. I've run my own businesses in my life, big publishing businesses, multi-million publishing businesses back in the day in South Africa before I came here and got involved in community development. Who knew that even existed? I was a capitalist at heart. How things can change. So yeah, I'm doing 1 year at the moment. I've got enough money in the bank to keep the staff alive for 1 year. My visionary planning is that we'll have an extra 7 staff. So we've got to go from 120,000 to 500,000 a year. And how do we get that turnover? You know, we're needing philanthropists. We're needing people who see this bigger picture, who care about the planet, who have the money and go like, I absolutely want to get behind you, Jason. Yes, yes, this absolutely makes sense for everybody on the planet. This is the most exciting thing, that we've come across in a very, very long time. And the beautiful thing about it is not just me telling you this. We now are the largest member-led health charity for men in Scotland. We have over 3,500 members made up of men and women who want to see healthy men. Now, when you've got that kind of backing, that says to me, we ain't going away. There's traction here.
Definitely.
Our 7 trustees are all volunteers. They're all men that are in sheds across the country themselves, so they absolutely get it. That's really important. Community empowerment is, incredibly important. What I'm seeing is that councils are getting less and less money. Governments are wanting volunteers to do more and more work, which was statutory paid jobs. Well, then why aren't you supporting your biggest movement of health, which are engaging thousands of volunteers just to help them not have to redevelop the wheel and put them under less stress? I mean, this is just stupidity. This is insanity. And that's why we don't understand this kind of double dealing, saying this but delivering that. So, 5 years ahead, I don't know what kind of world we're going to have. Personally, I can see them putting the noose around the middle class by increasing the cost of living crisis, the bankers, what the bankers are doing. To me, they're trying to get rid of the middle class by just making everything super expensive, and unfortunately making the lower end even more deprived. Well, that's not a world that I want to support. I want to support entrepreneurism, and that really sits with the middle class.
Yes.
And COVID's really closed that up. They defeated a lot of us entrepreneurs out there. We're tired as well. Well, there's still a lot in this arm, I can tell you, and there's a lot of muscle out there amongst all of us who are saying, to hell with you. We're going to open up our businesses, and we're going to still be successful, because we are the power of the future. It isn't the big corporations like Amazon. It's not the elitists. It's the middle entrepreneur that makes this world interesting and keeps developing stuff. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm running a charity, but I am encouraging everybody out there to be entrepreneurial. And maybe that's what they don't like, because for the first time, we've got men volunteering in a kind, compassionate way. Maybe they don't want that. They want us to be silent and be quiet. And that's not the world that I want to support anymore.
Right, big strength to the entrepreneurs and to the, awesome.
100%. And the support like you give, it's like, I think we're all tired out. We're all tired, and to have action coaching, to have that support, which possibly doesn't just come from a capitalistic model anymore. You've got to think differently. I was playing golf with my young son yesterday. We were very blessed to spend some time together, and he still wants to hang out with his old dad, which is I've probably got something right.
Glad to hear
and to me, that's what it's all about. It's spending time with your kids, making time to spend time with your kids, listening to them, and giving them some advice when they ask for it. Very different to how I was brought up. And I can see from what he's telling me is that, when I ran my businesses, we kind of called the shots on the employees. Now the employers kind of have to deliver rather just a pay package, but actually a damn good deal to those employees, because those employees are actually saying, do I actually want to come and work for you? What are you offering me here? That's very different to even 15 years ago. Yeah, so that's encouraging. Yes. That's encouraging. I love that.
So yeah, you're gonna change the world.
We are changing the world, Brenda. We are. And it's if you want, I believe if you go to the top, it's just going to create more division the way to be successful with this is a grassroots movement. It's about education. And eventually what happens is the foundations get pulled away and then the tower comes toppling down. And so I'm all about empowering communities and empowering people in their lives, as I'm sure you are. So we kind of, this is a multi-directional approach. And it's going to take every man and every woman to make this world a better place. And we've got to do it together. We are different. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to embrace our diversity and our differences. And together we're stronger in bringing that. Who the hell wants to sit around the table with the same kind of people and the same type of mentality? How incredibly boring. So thankfully the world's changing, and we've got men and women around the boardroom table. I think part of the thing that we need to understand also is that our communication styles are different. And for me personally, I don't want to see women behaving like men around a boardroom table. I want women to be women around that boardroom table, and I want men to be men, and to give each other the scope and understanding about what those differences are and embrace them. And oh my goodness, are we going to be fantastic together? What a great species. But we've got to create that rich soil, that rich ground that we can grow and flourish in. And at the moment, I don't believe the soil is that nourishing. And we're trying to nourish the soil. We're trying to get fertilizer. And I'm hoping from what you're doing and speaking to business leaders is helping us realize, we're not alone out there. There actually are probably millions of us all thinking, oh, it's just me. But actually, we're not. We're quietly, building the movement. And, we've got to remember that we are a collective. We are the human species. And we're not two genders that are different. We are the human family. I think that's the most important thing to remember. And be kind to one another. Be patient.
Jason, we've gone well over my allocated time for this interview. It's been great.
Welcome
really
to my world.
I'm really delighted to hear all about what you're doing, and hope that anyone watching, and I'm trying to think myself how I can get involved and how I can help you make a difference. So thank you so much for being part of the Business Spotlight.
It's a privilege. Thanks very much.